So far, we haven't gotten to the most complicated part of Herder's approach, the part that has a huge historical echo, but also that leads to a kind of tension in his thinking that leads some people to think he really, in the end, offers us an inconsistent view. So let's start with the simplest observation. Herder advances historicism. He thinks that our own ethical judgments are tied to a certain historical era, and that these approaches people take to ethics and the ethical judgments they make vary across various historical periods. So he thinks, really, we can only talk about what is good or bad, right or wrong, from the point of view of our own time. I can say here, at this historical moment, these things are wrong, these things are right. Now, if I just say these things are wrong, or judged to be wrong, these things are judged to be right, well, yeah, okay. But the question is not what do people generally say about them. The question is, are they really right, or are they really wrong? And his claim is, no, those judgments vary with historical period. A certain thing might have been right for the ancient Egyptians and wrong for us now. The concepts that we have, the theories we have, and also the feelings that people have vary from historical era to historical era. And so if our feelings, if our concepts, if our theories change, well, yes, our ethics changes. That's partly a descriptive claim. But he says, actually, I don't think there is a position from which we can make judgments across these historical eras. Or at least it seems as if that's what he's saying. Feelings vary because, after all, keep in mind that our main task is to identify the causal factors. There are very different causal factors operating in ancient Egypt from 19th century Germany or our present day situation. And that's going to lead to different kinds of feelings that we have in response to different kinds of situations. It's going to lead to different judgments. It's going to lead to different decisions and different actions. And he says, here's all I can say to generalize about this. The ethical system that a culture adopts at a certain time is something that is designed to solve the problems that culture faces. The problems it confronts due to the external factors, because it has to actually succeed in the world, and due to internal factors, because there may be conceptual problems that culture is having to deal with. And so the ethical system expresses its best solution at the time to those kinds of problems, posed internally by the conceptual scheme itself and externally by the world. So the overall picture is, in a way, that ethical theories are a culture's attempt to adapt to its environment. Its conceptual environment, its cultural environment, as well as its physical environment. Those things do change over time. If we want to understand our own current judgments, what we need to do is, well, look both at our current culture, our current conceptual scheme, and our current physical situation to try to understand what problems, internal and external, we're trying to solve, but also to look at the history. These concepts don't just spring like Athena from the head of Zeus. Instead, those problems, those theories, those approaches to ethics are things that have a long history. And so we need to understand the history. Herder is the one who begins by saying we need to bring a genealogical method to ethics, something that Nietzsche later seizes upon when he writes The Genealogy of Morals. He's saying we need to trace the genetics. We need to go back into history and understand how all of this is developed. Our ethical beliefs, after all, change over time, and they change in response to circumstances, in response to problems, as attempted solutions to those problems. So if we want to understand them, we have to trace the history of those difficulties and then attempted solutions. And only in that way can we really understand the nature of the problems that our current beliefs are trying to solve. We have to ask, what function have these things fulfilled throughout history, assuming that function is going to be changing across those historical periods? We have to ask what influenced their development, what kinds of problems, internal and external, led to the changes that we've observed historically. And finally, what function do they fulfill now? What kind of adaptive problems are we facing? What sorts of cultural and external threats are we trying to deal with in constructing these approaches? I don't want to just say theories. He's saying, look, we make mistakes by going too much to theory. But the set of ethical judgments, in general, our normative conceptual scheme, what is it trying to do for us now? What has it done for us in the past? How did it change from those? And why did it change from those earlier incarnations into the one we have now? Now, from one point of view, Herder embraces a sort of relativism. He says we really cannot compare moralities across times. The morality of the ancient Egyptians was their attempt to solve as best they could the problems they were facing. Our current morality is our attempt to solve the problems that we are confronting. That's all that we can really say. We can judge them in their own terms. We can say, well, that didn't work out very well for the ancient Egyptians, did it? Or this one seems so far to be working out pretty well for us, etc., etc. We can make those internal judgments. But can we make judgments across eras? Can we say our morality is better than that of the ancient Egyptians? Here he's very doubtful. He says, I think within we can make those judgments. After all, we're trying to solve a certain set of problems, and we can say these solutions are pretty good or not so good, or this way of solving them is better than that way, from within our own framework. But if we look at a different set of problems and a different culture's solutions, we have no way of making the comparison. It's as if we were asking, is the beak of a robin better or worse than the beak of a vulture? Or maybe even in distant cases, whether it's better or worse than the snout of an elephant. There's no way to make those judgments. Within the field of robins, we can say, well, that one's beak seems better than this one's. This one's got damaged somehow. But can we make those judgments across species? Within the bird kingdom or within the animal kingdom more broadly? No. And if we go outside the animal kingdom, it's even worse. Is the robin's beak better or worse than a paperclip? The question is unintelligible. And so Herder says, at bottom, all comparison proves to be problematic. Is that true because we simply can't make any comparisons at all? As I said, within a conceptual framework, within a time, a historical era, then we can. But not across those eras. Well, so far, it would look like Herder is simply a historicist, a certain kind of relativist. But here's what makes it complicated. He also embraces a pluralistic cosmopolitanism. He is, first of all, a moral pluralist. He says, remember I told you, don't look at one kind of evidence, be suspicious of theories, they're going to blinker you and narrow your vision to a certain set of problems, they're going to oversimplify a complicated set of phenomena. Don't fall for the trap. There are many things going on in morality. It is not all a matter of pleasure and pain. It is not all a matter of virtue. It is not all a matter of happiness or eudaimonia. It's not all a matter of a goodwill. It's no one thing. It's not even a small finite set of things. There are all sorts of things we take to be of moral value. There are all sorts of things we take to be morally problematic. And it doesn't all reduce to one or even a small set of factors. And so he says, if it did, then maybe we could construct a theory and have a moral system. But since it isn't like that, there's no way we can do it. Now, a second part of this, he says, I actually think all human beings have equal moral value. And I think they all deserve equal moral respect. Now, this is quite familiar from the foundation of, well, really all of Enlightenment thought. Bentham saying everyone counts for one and no one more than one. Or Kant saying that every human being has a dignity and that everyone should be treated as an end and not merely as a means. So Herder affirms all of that. And in addition to those things, he affirms what he calls Bildung. That is to say, the development of personality, the development of one's capacities. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Not like the child who's forced to sit at the piano and unwillingly practices for an hour a day, but the person who joyfully sits down at the piano and plays because they want to. They want to develop that capacity. They want to develop that talent. I was lucky enough to play for 12 years with a great jazz pianist who played piano 10 hours a day and had been doing that since childhood. Well, you might imagine that already by his teens he was incredible, and by the time I played with him, I guess we started when he was around 50, wow. But that was entirely autonomous. Nobody was forcing him to do that. Now, the point is, it's that kind of autonomous, that freely chosen development of one's capacities that Hütte thinks is hugely important. So why do I say there's a tension here? Well, can you be a relativist and a cosmopolitan? Can you believe in equal moral value, equal moral respect, and the full development of people's capacities through their own free choices, and say we can't make moral judgments across historical eras? After all, it looks like he's generalizing, saying people have equal value. They deserve to be treated with equal respect. But, we can't judge between different moralities. If that culture says, no, they don't, we can't make any judgments. It looks as if he's saying everybody is of equal moral value. But if you say they're not, I can't say you're wrong. And that seems very, very odd. Now, can we reconcile this? Well, here's one way to do it, a way that I think would really violate the spirit of what Hütte is trying to do. We might say there are a variety of historical eras. They're trying to solve different problems. They construct different normative approaches, and we can trace the development of those across history. But then here is Hütte himself, making totally ahistorical judgments, as if he's not really part of that historical development, as if he's sitting above it, looking at things from a bird's eye point of view, or really from God's eye point of view. And that looks just incompatible with any kind of relativism or historicism. Yeah, there are historical developments, but it's possible to take a standpoint, sub specie eternitatis, as it were, from the perspective of eternity, where we make these judgments from a privileged position. We take the view from nowhere. And that, in a way, is, to use Thomas Nagel's terms, the tension here. Is Hütte making these judgments from nowhere, or is he making them from here, from his individual perspective? But if he is, then, well, is that all we're getting? Like, hey, here's my judgment at this time. Not saying those people before were wrong who denied it. Maybe that's the best they could do. Maybe that was right for them. But this is right for me. Or right for us. Right for this time. Maybe that's all we have to do. And so that would be one way of solving this problem. Saying, look, it's very much like, judgments about food. So I love mushrooms. My wife doesn't like them at all. I can still say mushrooms are great. And I recognize she has a right not to like mushrooms. So in one sense, I am tolerant. I say, your value judgment about mushrooms is just as valid as mine, but I think they're great. And I think it's just sad that you can't appreciate their greatness. But if you can't, okay. You don't like mushrooms, I'm not going to push them on you. And we could have that attitude about morality too. Hey, we think equality's great. You guys didn't. Well, what are you going to do? I'm going to insist equality is great, but if you don't want to affirm that, that's fine. Now, that seems odd. And it seems as if when Hütte adopts this cosmopolitan viewpoint, he's trying to do more than that. More than just say, hey, look, we now in 19th century Germany, we value this. A lot of cultures haven't done that. A lot of cultures now might not do that. Oh, well, to each his own. That would be pretty disappointing. That would affirm the relativism, but it would take the cosmopolitanism and make it look awfully limited, awfully tied to a particular era. Is there any other way of taking it? Well, I think there is, but it's not entirely free from problems either. Because Hütte could say this, I am judging, yes, from my own era's point of view. So there is a sense in which, I confess, this is a bit like me liking mushrooms. It's saying, hey, this is what, at my time and place, seems right. We think equality of value, equality of human dignity, those are really important things. Not everybody has thought that. But I'm going to continue to affirm that we're right and they were wrong. Now, is that because I take some view from the perspective of eternity? No. It's because I stand at what so far is the culmination of that historical process. I can study the history, and if I really do understand what function those judgments were fulfilling in their culture, and how they were solving the problems of their own civilizations, and then how those things have developed over time into what we have now, then I am in a position to say our theory actually is a better theory. Why? Because it's designed not only to solve the problems you were facing, but to solve the problems that we're facing now. In effect, through that awareness of history, we become aware of a wider and wider set of problems, cultural problems as well as external problems the world faces us with, and we become better and better at constructing a conceptual framework capable of dealing with them. Do we think, for example, that our scientific theories are better than the scientific theories of the ancient Egyptians or ancient Greeks? Yes, we do. And why? Well, to some extent, yes, they were solving different sets of problems. We have a much broader set of problems. We're aware of the judgments they were making and why. We're aware of those kinds of considerations. But we are evaluating claims in light of a much broader set of experiences. A much broader set of historical and experimental results. So in short, we're taking into account a lot more data. Well, I think Herder can say the situation with our normative concepts and our normative theories is very similar to the process that has taken place with respect to our scientific judgments, our scientific concepts, and our scientific theories. We have a broader and broader set of data that we're trying to accommodate. And the same thing is true in morality too. So, he could say, when I talk about the importance of human equality and human dignity, I am talking about something that is responding to not just my own culture's problems and so on from a blinkered point of view. I'm responding to all of history. Our culture has developed this over time in response to the problems the ancient Egyptians faced and the ancient Greeks and the Romans and so on and so forth all the way down the line. And so all of that is included in some way in the framework we have. Does that make it the absolute correct framework that I can announce from the perspective of eternity? No. But neither is it the case that my scientific theory is one that I can proclaim as the final truth about anything. I can simply say that given everything we've investigated, not just the problems we're facing now in the lab, but the problems that scientists have been facing for millennia, this is the best we've done so far. And we can do the same thing in morality. We can do the same thing in ethics and say, here's how we have an advantage over the ancient Egyptians. We have more experience because we can take advantage of their experiences as well as all of those from the intervening stages of this civilization. And that enables us to have an approach that solves a much wider class of problems that actually makes sense of a lot more. And our feelings are things that have evolved given not just our own individual experiences, but the experiences of our entire species, or at least our entire civilization up to this point. So Herder can say at that point, look, I have reasons for thinking that my account is a better account than yours, and that somebody 100 years from now might have a better account than I have now. So I think there is a way for Herder to say, I can be both a historicist and an unapologetic pluralistic cosmopolitan. I can advocate equality. I can advocate the importance of human dignity and human character development. And I don't have to feel bad about that. I'm in a better position than the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, and so on were at those periods of history. But now I want to leave you with a worry, because if that's true, you might think that, well, we've got a basic picture of historical progress going on. We have Herder saying, yes, we can make judgments only within our own time, but our own time incorporates the experiences of those who have gone before us. And so actually we have reason to think that there is moral progress, that we're getting better and better in something like the way there's been scientific progress. Does that mean all advances are positive, that we always progress? No, we can take a wrong turn, theoretically, for example. We can lose data. Historical records can fall away and be forgotten. So we can do worse. But I'm not sure there is anything in the picture that can explain how we could become vastly worse, at least without a huge historical calamity. And so the thought I want to leave you with is this. I think if you transported Johann Herder to our current situation and said, look at these public works of art, look at these buildings, what do you think? Better, right? He would say, no, These are terrible. These are just awful compared to what we were producing in the early 19th century and to what people had been producing for hundreds of years before that. What on earth happened here? And I think he might say the same about some, not all by any means, but some of our moral views. He would look at them and say, wait, what? You think what? And be horrified. And does that pose a problem for his view? After all, it should be, well, an uneven, but nevertheless general picture of progress. And he might say, look, I'm sorry, but I think I was in a better position than the ancient Greeks were, for example, to make moral judgments, but I think you're in a worse position. And why would that be true? Well, as I mentioned, one possible explanation would be a historical calamity. Now, you can point to the fall of Rome as such a calamity, for example. It's hard to say that between Herder's time and our own, there's been a fall of Rome type event. But I think he might say, here's the thing. In my day, we remembered that history. We actually may not have applied the kind of historical analysis that I was specifically recommending, but we knew the history. We did understand the problems that those earlier civilizations faced. I think you've forgotten it. Do you guys know any history at all? Do you understand what it was that drove ancient Egyptian culture or ancient Greek culture or ancient Roman culture or the culture of the Middle Ages? How much of that do you actually know? And there, I think, Herder could maybe save his approach and account for the fact that it's not all progress in human affairs by saying sometimes there is a huge forgetting. Sometimes there's just a monstrous cultural forgetting of all kinds of things. We still cannot produce concrete as strong as Roman concrete. We can't build a road as well as the Romans built roads. Think about that. They were doing this 2,000 years ago, and they were doing it better. But the knowledge of how to do it was lost. Maybe a recent experiment by some scientists has recovered that technique. But it was lost for 2,000 years. That kind of thing can occur. And it can occur, yes, through an external calamity, but it can also occur through a culture simply forgetting to study its own history. That kind of cultural forgetting, I think he could say, is a very dangerous problem. Being a competent historicist requires you actually to know the history. And if you don't, then you are going to be stuck making those judgments from within your own time. And then it's really true. You have no basis at all for thinking that judgments you are making are any better than those made in your own civilization in the past or in any competing civilization.